Good day, everybody. Special day today. It's Thursday, May 16th, according to the calendar. It's another episode of the Content Evolution New World Weekly Call. We have a good quorum joined up here today, but today I, Mike McGuire, am going to pretend to be host and try to corral everybody here because
You're
Kevin
not going to
Clark.
pretend. You're going to do it, Mike. You're going to do it, buddy.
I'm in. I'm there. I got it. We're
Sounding
doing
like
this.
Sydney.
We like to change up once in a while. But in this week's edition, there's gonna be two people involved in this. One we're gonna be talking about in some of his work, and another one is Kevin. And both of them, as you all know, are very shy about their opinions. It's very hard often to draw them out to really get their understanding about what the hell it is they're really talking about. Galway in particular as one of the subjects. And Kevin and I will put a link in there if many of you may be familiar with Scott Galloway. What is it? Is it Prof G, I think is his nickname. He's a marketing professor at NYU Stern School of Business. Kevin Clark, we know his background. The topic today is that Professor Galloway, was recorded in a podcast recently, not his own, where one of the key topics was one of his hobby horses, which is branding is dead. And we're going to start that conversation. Some of you will put the link in there, but it's not hard to find Professor Scott Galloway anywhere on the web. And Professor Scott everything he does tends to be a rant. But he did bring this point up, and it's something I've seen he's brought up before, that these notions that marketers have about what a brand is, what it means, is still kind of tied to the past. And he thinks, frankly, it's dead. And we're going to let Kevin get started. We'll then open it up for a conversation. But Kevin, the rant timer is now on.
All right.
Go for it.
All right. Very good. Well, if this was intelligence squared, right, I would be on the brands are alive side of the argument, as opposed to them being passe and dead. You can take your own view. I think that's what I heard from Scott was he's got it very closely tied to brands are created via advertising, and that is a very narrow construct, right? That is no longer really relevant. And I don't think that it was ever actually relevant, because at the end of the day, there are all kinds of things that have reputations, right? That are, that ultimately sum up to being a brand. And let me tell you something. One of my friends is Chris Beaumont, who used to be the head of development and business development for WPP Group, right, across Asia. And we were having this conversation and came to the conclusion that without brands, if you went into the grocery store, right, and you did not have a preconceived notion of brands that you liked, and every purchase that you made on that trip was a considered purchase, you would be in the store for hours, okay? So you have to, if you're going to have a well-considered life, right, and be able to use your time effectively, brands are a shortcut, because that they do the things that you want them to do and they work, right? Whether it's, the milk that you're buying or the laundry detergent that you like or whatever. Now, look, there's no permanence here. If the brand betrays you, you're going to become promiscuous and decide that you're going to go someplace else. But I would weigh up that brands still play a really important role. They're still with us. And in fact, it's recursive when you say Prof G is a brand, okay? He benefits from, having created a persona. The last thing that I'll say, is that when Google was new, Google never advertised. They didn't have to advertise, right? Because by word of mouth, people said, oh, this is really good. Okay, I like, the results that I'm getting from this search service, and it just kind of spread by wildfire. They didn't start to advertise until they got into other things later, right? Like Pixel phones and so on and so forth. I will finish by saying my architecture, and by the way, I don't really believe a lot of, when they've foisted brand architecture on us, is I really believe more in brand ecosystems, that these are living systems, that they, once you build a brand, it isn't like a building that, never changes, right? They're constantly interactions. I think of brands as having three elements: relevance. Why do I care about you as a customer, and why does the customer care about the company that is giving me something that I value? What is the context in which it shows up, either culturally, economically, sociologically? What is the context in which that relevance shows up? And then the multiplier effect is it mutually beneficial? Are both of us getting something out of it? And if you can get to, mutual benefit, you will decide that I can limit my consideration. I'm going to go back and buy you again and again because you're doing something that's valuable. You'd have to disturb our relationship, right, to become, looking for relevance elsewhere. So, look, I think that Scott, by the way, is a pretty thoughtful guy, but he does every once in a while climb out on a limb that I don't agree with. And this is one of those times, all right? And I think that if he were listening to this, he might agree and say, really, I was talking about, the kinds of cases that I used to teach. By the way, Mike, didn't Scott sell something to your former employer at one time?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to keep the intro short, but besides being a professor at Stern, he's been the founder of two fairly successful companies. One was Red Envelope, which I think was successful for quite a while, and then it wasn't. And the other one that Kevin is speaking about is L2, which to some degree his intentional. I think that it's always been intentional. I don't think Scott is intentional. Kevin, would you not agree that
Oh
he
yeah.
pretty much doesn't say anything without a very specific point of view or intent? The company was L2. And you may have not remember that name, but they did have a fairly well-known branded element called the Genius Brands surveys. And this was something that L2, my former employer, did acquire him for the L2 because it was part of Gartner's effort at kind of growing its marketing targeted research, i.e., research for marketers. And L2 was a very, if anybody is familiar with that, the methodology was extremely rigorous. He did build a team of particularly data scientists, and they had a number of attributes for a brand that would either have them ranked as genius or laggards. And it was, a very highly very strong methodology. They would do a certain amount of surveys, but they also did a lot of scraping and monitoring on their own to assess the brand's ability to communicate its value, et cetera. In the B2B world, they cited John Deere last time I looked at one of their reports as being one of the, as being a genius brand. And so, yeah, Kevin, it's interesting that, despite everything about brand is dead, he spent at least 10 years building up that brand, and a number of people from L2 went on to fairly important jobs at places like Spotify. And I think that's part of his, and I think I did put a link to one of the many Scott G interviews you can see with
yeah,
the title. He's been working the brand is dead for a while. And it's, but again, always a very interesting POV and, a very articulate man. And I thought, Kevin, I watched that a couple of times and I wanted to come back to you, he says that, but really then what is the context for that statement or the supporting statement? He's talking about, back in the days when we had only 3 broadcast networks and the medium was television, radio, or print, that are extremely cheap when you think about it from back in the day. And I always feel like that's always been a little bit of not a cop out, but again, he's being very provocative. But he talks about that we've moved more into a direct kind of response world as opposed to broad, mega audience type of impressions that one's trying to drive. I think the challenge with Scott always is he's very good at a very provocative point of view. And I think unlike when I've seen him do the formal presentation in the past, he can't do it on these interviews, right? His presentations are very dense and they're very fast, and he doesn't get a chance to use much of that material. So this is, a riff he's had. I think he does bring up this point about the change of how we engage with an audience.
I would just say that his context is somewhat narrow, and I've always had a very broad context for my notion of what brands are, how they function. In fact, I think that nations functionally are brands. Why do you choose, to come to a particular place, right? It's because they have signals and promises that they're offering people that say, oh, this would be a good place to be a citizen. So at any rate, we have hands up. Mike, you want to?
Yes. Let's see. Mark, go for it. Kevin, I think you have to take him off mute. I can't.
Hey, it looks like I'm unmuted. Hello, everybody.
No, you're good. We can hear you.
Good. Well, the first thing that Scott has done is got us all talking about this. So he's been effective. Somebody once told me that the best way to get attention is to say, start your article with the death of something. I once wrote the death of command and control. And obviously, command and control is not dead, but it gets people talking. I think what we're really talking about here is brand loyalty. Is brand loyalty dead? And that is something, Kevin's point is well taken. Brands stand for something. You can choose it. You can do this. You can rely on it in some cases. Used to be that you could get fired for not hiring the right brand. That brands had a particular standing in companies. But sorry, my wife's phone isn't going off. But
That's right.
But brand loyalty, I think, is really changing. I think that it's very easy, and I think that even that's what Google's experiencing right now. Will they be able to dominate and keep all these kind of things? Because people, given the flow of information, and given the ease of rise of brands and new things, it's a whole lot easier to switch, I think, except in particular cases, than it may used to be. So I would recommend that we talk about not a brand's dead, because they're not, but is brand loyalty changing?
I will tell you something, Mark. That's a good point. Is I think that one of the persistent problems, and there are quite a few, all right, but in this context is the phrase lifetime customer value, right? That's a lie. All right. By telling someone, oh, look, we can calculate the lifetime customer value of this person because they're in the franchise and they're going to be here forever. No, they're not. All right. You can, potentially say, we're going to behave in a way that every time you interact with us, we're going to earn your trust again, right, in this moment, and it will put you higher in the consideration set. However, it only takes a moment for somebody else to, disrupt a value proposition and cause you for a moment to want to try something else, right? I mean, things are, specifically designed to do that, all right?
Right.
Your hand is going out, all right? And, you're about to buy, this on the shelf and your hand goes, boop, all right? John Rubin, who's on our advisory board, is the world's expert in what I'm describing, which is that you have an intention and it changes at the last minute at the shelf level, and you try something else, right? And there are cues and signals and coupons, and he helped invent the instant coupon machine. If you remember the thing blinking at you and giving you a coupon right at the store shelf level, he invented that, right? And it was to create that effect, right, for something that was that was new. So again, the loyalty component, Mark, has become something that you can't take for granted. You have to behave in a way that you're earning it over and over and over again, because people are better consumers. They're better. I don't actually like the word consumers. They're better customers. They're better clients, right? They're paying more attention. Rob, your hands up.
Yep, Rob's up.
Yes. Just to add on a couple of things, I agree with the point you made, Kevin, about his focus being more about advertising, mass advertising, than it was about actual branding, right? If you go back to the question that he was asked before that question about what skills marketers need to have, and he said, be good storytellers. It's
Exactly.
like, well, isn't that kind of branding, right?
Yes.
And even some of the examples he gave to kind of prove his point about branding being dead, where he's talking about word of mouth, and that's how he chooses his new hotels, is he goes on TripAdvisor. It's like that; those are based on brand experiences, right? So I don't think he does a very good job of kind of supporting the case that he's trying to make there.
You know, agreed. And I mean, yes, I'm not defending Scott, but it's to your point, Rob. When you see him do like a few years ago, the full presentation, he takes you through like 75 years.
Sure.
Right. Here's Ford, remember X and Y.
Right.
And, and I think that's to some degree. And I think, to Mark's point, he's got us talking about it, but I think it's always a relevant conversation because there weren't, 100 million people online. If the equivalent was, there weren't 10,000 people publishing a weekly newsletter on, cold brew coffee machines. That's for you, Bruce.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome. And, now there are, right? I think, what was the one I heard? They cold brew coffee using ultrasound, something like that. It was weird. But Rob, I mean, we saw this, back in the day in the 90s with computer manufacturers and software manufacturers in particular. What was interesting is with this new medium, we didn't quite have the web at that time, but it was still fairly traditional, right? In terms of branding, it was,
Sure.
you do your fancy photo shoots for the, next week's, back cover for a PC week. But then you were also spending a lot of time trying to find customers for that computer that would, be willing to speak publicly about how it helped their business.
Right.
I'm not sure, when you look at it, that we still see artifacts of those kind of practices. They just shifted to influencers, right? Or kind of set 1, 2 to 3 steps removed from the actual brand marketing team itself.
Yeah.
I don't know if that you would call it indirect or what, but
yeah, and I do agree with the point he made about the actual quality of the product being more important now than maybe it used to be. So that's a key point there. And I just also wanted to add to that I did write a column once, Mike, that said Apple is dead. So that didn't go over so well.
yeah, I remember that. I remember being, Rob will know this, I remember being the Apple reporter at PC Week. And let me tell you, that was not as fun a role as you might think back then.
I still get the occasional death threat when that pops up on the Internet Archives.
You didn't do an illustration with the the bite, where the the graphic
logo
has a little bite out of it.
Yeah.
You didn't put a worm in there. Right,
rotten apple.
That's a good. That would have been a bad
actually
thing.
I thought one of our editorial cartoonists did do that at one point.
We probably did at some point. Yeah.
Don't deface the logo. All right. But one of the things as a brand steward that I had to do for ThinkPad on a continual basis for long time was people wanted to make ThinkPads in different colors. Right. And I just kept on saying, no, you don't. Okay. It's iconic. Right. People can, there are a couple of things about it, right, that make it different. All right. One is the logo is not in the center. Right. And the reason that most PCs have a logo in the center is that's where the pin goes in to put the ABS plastic or the flow of whatever it is that you're making. That's where the pin goes in. You got to cover it up, all right? To make a ThinkPad, the pins had to go in the side, all right, to cause it, because we wanted to put this logo, over in the corner, right? Well, if you see a notebook computer with the logo in the corner, it's probably a ThinkPad, right? You open it up, you see a red track point, that's probably a ThinkPad, and if it's black. So we had a portfolio of things that we were known for, and it's like, don't mess around with that, guys. The one time we had optional color covers, right? I was asked to defend, right, whether this was a good decision. I had to go up to corporate, and we didn't really have, you know, all the evidence that was necessary to support the decision. And, you know, the senior VP said, okay, that program is now over, right? You know, get rid of all that inventory, all right? And, you know, there is some artificial barrier reef off of the coast of Florida that is made up of, you know, ThinkPad color covers, right? Because, you know, that program ended immediately because, you know, it needed a lot of, you know, support to say that was a good idea, and it actually wasn't a great idea. Anyway,
Can I just inject, because you
go ahead,
talked about
Mark.
ThinkPads? I was a ThinkPad guy for a very long time, and you lost me when I wound up at Apple, but you lost me when you did two things. One, when you were no longer an IBM brand, when it got sold out of IBM. So the brand that I was buying was IBM, not ThinkPad. And the second was that little red dot, which I loved, and somehow it went away.
Well, it didn't go away. It just was in a subclass of machines for commercial, and they started to make some others that didn't have it. But my ThinkPads have always had it because I always sought it out.
It's a great day. It was a great
There
day.
was actually, Mark, there was a time I was negotiating. Tim would probably remember this. A guy named Woz, okay? You know, he was like, there was a very senior person at Apple called Jaws, I think. And then there was
Greg
Woz
Joswiak.
guy, okay, that was in marketing. And I had a very long negotiation because we knew that Apple was buying ThinkPads, okay? And what they were doing was they were taking the preload off and putting the Apple, right, you know, preload on the ThinkPads. I don't know whether there was a subclass of people who needed to do that for some reason, whatever. And I said, we should make that a SKU, right? We should, you know, go ahead and we can expand your presence in the marketplace by having a ThinkPad with an Apple operating system, because we've had others, you know, it's Linux, right? Let's do this. And they thought about it for a long time, but they said, absolutely, it's off-brand, right? Because our stuff locks up, right? It's the machine and it's the operating system. It's not either or, it's both, right? So we're not going to do this, which I thought was a sensible, you know, way to, you know, look at it. On the other hand, we were trying to get them to, you know, expand market opportunity and to create a differentiation for a subclass of ThinkPads, whatever, all right? Didn't work out, all right?
But
You
what
would
do
have
you
been able to
think?
stand the franchise, Mark.
Was the IBM thing but for me it was because we're talking brands.
Yeah.
When ThinkPad became a non-IBM brand anymore, did
Mhm.
that make a difference in your opinion?
They took a lot of the DNA with them because they took the development team, they took the designers, you know, Lenovo was able to continue a lot of the things that we care about. And, you know, although I haven't, you know, stayed with the entire management system of how it's done, since it's end to end, we used to OEM stuff, right? Is we used to design it and do the engineering specifications and then give it to a third party, sometimes in Taiwan, sometime in South Korea, for the most part. And then we would get it back, all right, and sell it in the marketplace. But Lenovo is fully integrated, you know, in terms of what it designs, what it makes, all right? They own their manufacturing capability. So I think that, you know, end to end, you know, they've got more control over the entire process. So I think that there's some goodness there. And, you know, it's been self-expressed that they're happy with where they are on their quality levels, which is what I care about, is that if they put it in your hands, right, that it works. That works for a long time. Other thoughts?
I wanted to contribute to the
Hey, Sharon.
Yeah, hi. So a couple things. First of all, I love that we're having this conversation. And so first let me get back to Scott for a minute.
Mhm.
So I can't say I know him well, but I have worked with Scott. I hired him back when I was head of marketing at La Prairie, back
Mhm.
in that time when he was at the helm of L2. I actually attended some of his classes and I hired the company and I thought they did a great job of exactly what you were describing earlier. I think it was just they really were at the forefront of something back in the day in terms of providing information around who's winning at that new thing, which was the digital, social mobile landscape at the time.
Mhm.
And I also think it's so interesting because we had the Federation call earlier the other day, and Cindy spoke so eloquently, encouraging us all to have a podcast. And I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to that because to me, I think it was Scott being out there to create good content, like controversial content. And it was up to the podcast host to kind of debate back. And he
Mhm.
didn't. He really missed that huge opportunity, in my opinion, unless it was like predetermined that he wasn't going to really comment back or, kind of engage in any kind of real intellectual
It
debate.
was a little too much hero worship.
Yeah, it was kind of
Yeah.
really, so if any one of us had been there, we would have had this opportunity to really, go at it with him. And I think it would have elevated the conversation a lot. Um, I'm also going to say that I think this little conversation we had right now about Lenovo and ThinkPad is
Mhm.
right at the center of everything we were just talking about at the beginning of our hour here. It is how, and that Scott brought up, it's like how much now, given the very quick advancement in technology, how much is brand and how much is product these days? And I
Mhm.
think that
Oh,
what happened, I don't, you all know better than I do who were really involved, but yeah, I think IBM lent a lot to ThinkPad brand, in terms of that brand architecture. And Lenovo probably gained a lot from ThinkPad, but I'm not sure how much it at the time or even now, just as a, it gives, it gives value to ThinkPad. And all around it were other innovations that, as you were saying, Kevin, people are like, oh, oh, but wait, there's this Apple thing over here. And maybe that's something I should be considering, and then more and more and more with product innovation.
So Sharon, the original price for buying PC Company from IBM was $1.8 billion. All right. That was Legend, moving, assets from PC Company into its own orbit and then developing the Lenovo brand. Right. And when I was talking to David Martin, when he was still running Interbrand, right, and he's still on the board of advisors, he said, I think that they paid $1 billion for ThinkPad brand. And then there was $800,000 for routes to market beyond China and a management system, right? That was his calculation of, what, that transaction was really about. Arguably, you could look at that, but we had a fairly sophisticated brand licensing, agreement that had to go into place, right, to, effectuate their ability to do that without giving away IBM's motto, which is think, right? They said, you can't take on our motto. So, it was interesting. It was a very interesting negotiation.
You certainly know, but you have all this in-depth information that, we couldn't possibly know. But I think it's just this idea of, for all of us, because as each of us, I guess, is going to be thinking about how do we demonstrate to the world in bigger ways our credentials and gain notoriety. We talked about publishing, we talked about podcasts, we talked about a whole bunch of things on those calls, which I think is really interesting for all of us who participated, and even those who maybe didn't. That's why I'm bringing it up, is that what Scott is or Prof G or whatever we're going to call him these days, is
Sure.
very good at is gaining notoriety. And even as he humble brags,
Mhm.
I can't even think about what we're thinking about completely because I'm already thinking about my next flight to
That's
Shanghai
right.
or whatever he was saying, during the, um, he's good at it. And I think
Yes,
we
he is.
can learn. My only point is we can take a page out of his book and say, maybe I'm not going to do that. That's just not my style, but there's a lot to learn there. And I was
Well,
really happy to kind of look at the conversation in that.
Look, I consume a lot of Scott Galloway, stuff, and I only picked on this one, title of this particular podcast. I said that's a good because I disagree with the title,
Yeah,
but
me
it
too,
doesn't
of
mean
course.
that
well,
he's got a lot of interesting perspectives. Mike.
well,
Yeah.
part of me thinks that this is Scott saying goodbye to that part of his life in marketing, right? As opposed to now he's his own brand.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And a lot of what he's doing is focus on more some of the larger societal and economic things as opposed to just marketing. But the thing I was a little surprised, he kind of went through the normal, what you expect, right? Well, look, Facebook, Google, etc. What you had mentioned this, Kevin, about Google. What do we know? What's the common thing? None of them advertise. Well, yeah, they do. They just don't do it in a one-to-many broadcast familiar form of advertising. Most of the software companies I looked at in the last 10 or 15 years in the marketing space, when's the last time anybody here saw Salesforce ad? Except maybe on some B2B, business site you were at or whatever, right? Or, many of the mobile, especially the companies like Braze, their form of advertising is directed right at their audience, who they expect to then do a more linked form of word of mouth.
Yeah.
Right. So
Look at all the attention that generative AI is getting, and they're not advertising. They just do stuff, right? And people,
right.
pay attention to it, which is while Kyle's hand is up, probably.
Kyle.
Hey, what's happening? So I've always been a fan of the notion of a brand as a promise, and
Sure.
every single touch point with a customer or a prospective customer either fulfills that promise or denies that promise. And I think it's increasingly hard because everything's so fragmented. You've got so many touch points with a brand. Your brand is being eroded on a regular basis unless you're relentless about every single touch point. And I think of things like, the CFO saying, hey, let's offshore customer service to an Indian call center. Like, how many brands has that destroyed? Like, every single airline I think of, if I think of calling an airline, maybe the exception is Southwest, because you can generally get to talk to someone there pretty quickly. But in general, for any company, I can get to a human being if I want to buy something. But if I actually have a problem I need solved, I can't talk to anyone, or I talk to someone who's clueless that has no authority. Like, that kind of stuff does more damage to brands than anything. I think about Apple. I've been an Apple fanboy for decades. And if I think about Apple, it's like a couple of things stick in my mind. It should just work. Well, for the past 10 years since Jobs died, there's not a relentless commitment to quality. So their stuff just doesn't work anymore. If you look at the latest iPad announcement, they talked about it's thinner. Like, Apple never talked about hardware specs. They always talked about magic and what you could do with it. And now they're like, it's not as fat as the last one. It's like, I feel like maybe the sort of communications have gotten so fractured and fragmented and scaled because of all this stuff. And companies just don't have the attention span to focus on every single interaction.
Well,
like
they shouldn't.
They
shouldn't focus on every single one because they don't have the resources to do that. There's a Francis Frey thing that's called, what services businesses must get right. That's in the Harvard Business Review. And it's like, what are you going to be known for? you should double down and invest on the sense points and the things that you really want to own in the marketplace. So I would say that one of the things that Apple owns versus competition is the out-of-box experience. I mean, the way that they package, right, and your first moments of owning an Apple product is actually better than anybody else in the marketplace. Now, because they pay attention to it. Other, go ebb and flow of, hey, corrugated box, plenty good, okay, for what we're,
I would argue, Kevin, that the experience of using a product that has shitty QA on the software defies if I have a good experience with the box, that's a 5-minute experience.
I know.
And then I have the next 3 years of dealing with this thing just doesn't work, right?
I understand. And so that's going back to your promise, all right?
Yeah.
Which is what I call brands are an invitation to your party, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, we're inviting you to come and, come and be part of Apple and experience Apple for the next 2 years of your life, right? Because it's going to be in your hands and in your face or whatever. And guess what? You accept the invitation, you go to the party and you say, I'm never going to go to this party again. Right? Even if you give me an invitation, I'm not going to come. All right. This goes back to, you've got to earn that trust over and over and over again.
Yep.
Lifetime customer value. I think that Apple felt like they had lifetime customer value,
Yep.
right? And that the people were in the franchise and man, they're never going to leave. Well, guess what?
Well,
some
but you
defectors,
mentioned,
and it's for some of the reasons that you're talking about, right?
Kyle,
So,
you had mentioned, Kyle, that fragmentation. I think as far as the kind of the marketing, the outbound from Apple has suffered from that fragmentation, right? I mean, because 15 years ago, they may not have been, they weren't the biggest TV ad spender, but their TV ads were really strategic.
It was
right?
what they've lost is like what Jobs had was a relentless commitment to understanding what that brand was, like relentless, right? Like
Oh,
to
yeah.
the point of you couldn't work for him, but he was relentless about it. And since he's gone, that relentlessness has gone with him. And all of that attention to detail has just drifted and dropped and lowered. And it's
I'm
weird
gonna agree with
in some
that,
place. What's
Kyle.
that?
I agree with you, Kyle. And I actually am going to say that just yesterday on LinkedIn, another branding expert, Maria Boos, who I met at my days at Siegel and Gale, posted that she actually posted the note from Apple, and it said, we're letting you know that our subscription to Apple TV is increasing from $69 to $99. And that was it. There was no because of, and here's why, or continue to enjoy,
or sorry about that.
Or, yeah.
Yeah, it just said regards Apple.
There you go. And that's the thing. It's like I think to do branding well, like why there's only a handful of companies that have it and keep it is because it's hard, right? Like
Yeah.
everything from like that little, that's some functionary, 16 levels down, a division of Apple wrote that letter,
Yeah.
but there was no one there that said, no, this is horrible.
Well,
Right.
Okay,
we used
so
to
Kyle,
refer to him as the over my dead body person, like over my dead body, that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, Kyle, let's go, take the the plot out of, Asimov's Foundation series, right? Where Harry Seldon, is the psychohistorian that informs, millennia of, future, people in the galaxy. Hey, you need to recreate Steve, right? And create, like the Steve hologram, right? And, go channel.
No.
Mike saying, no, don't do that.
Don't do that. Don't do that to Steve. They did it, and it was horrible what they did to Tupac. So I'm still upset about Tupac. So
all right, Rick.
Well, I think Sharon just hit the nail on the head where there is no one. It's probably more about the death of the CMO than it is about the brand, right? Because I think there are so many people within a business that think they're experts on what the brand is, what the brand should stand for. You don't have that one person that says, over my dead body, are we putting that out? Right. Instead, it's decided by committee. And before you know it, it goes out and some executive is looking, going, why the heck didn't we write this message better? Why wasn't this done better? And I've seen this in my past corporate jobs, and I see it now with what I'm doing, which is that everybody believes they have an equal, internally inside of the companies, everyone believes they have an equal say on what the brand stands for and what the brand is. And where I think the difference is between now and some of the times when we're talking about Apple and ThinkPad and stuff like that, you would never have a junior level staffer that would take control over a message to all of the clients and blast it out without it going through the CMO. Now you may have a social media team that is out there blasting stuff out left and right without any oversight or they're given that type of authority. But now that they're reaching an audience in some instances, hundreds of thousands of customers with whatever they think is funny that day, whatever they think is humorous, whatever they think is going to get engagement or whatever it may be. And so within the organization, you have a lot more people that assume they know what the brand is, what it stands for, and
I just want to tell you,
the best
Rick,
way to
that
promote
is
it.
exactly why I like working with companies in Japan. All right, is the brand is owned by the chairman's office. All right, the designers report directly into the CEO's office. All right, because they care so much about the ethos. That was the case when I was working for NEC, when I was interacting with Sony, when I was working with Panasonic, right, Toyota, right. These are not delegatable issues, right? These are existential to who we are, and it's just really refreshing, to find that that they pay that much attention. And by the way, these are the companies that have 100-year plans. All right, good luck, quarter to quarter. Put that up against a company that's thinking 100 years ahead. Mark, your hands up.
Yeah, we're right back at AI. Can we have, isn't there a virtual Steve Jobs that we could make that you say, don't send anything out unless you've talked to virtual Steve Jobs?
Over my dead body.
Or virtual chairman, or over your dead body, his dead body.
We're not going to do that over my dead
the
body.
virtual chairman's office of Mitsubishi, or in other words, now what we're entering into and what we're trying to build, in fact, is this thing that says we can have this presence for you where you don't have to go up the ladder, you don't have to talk to a person. That person is now artificial.
Mark, if you instantiate that person, there's no room for the voice of the young people.
Hang on, Mark.
I would say that too. Build them in. Yes,
Mark.
yes.
As we're going to go to Mac in a second, but one comment on that, Mark, is I think you would like the idea of engaging with Steve Jobs in a chat GPT conversation more than you would like the reality of an engagement with Steve Jobs, having been on the end of that look a couple times. Now, Mac, you've been very patient. Go.
Oh, and every great conversation. Thank you. I do want to go back to Rick's point, which is we've seen not just the death of the CMO, but the death of the strategic CMO, the CMO who was at the leadership table. That title's still there, but it's transitioned from someone with a voice to someone whose only charge is to take orders. And given that the people giving the orders are in a constant flux of what they want done, then that idea of a sustainable brand, something that lives 20 or 100 years, is depleted because the CMO, the people who execute, are at the whim of whoever is setting the agenda that morning. So that idea of how do you reestablish the CMO as a strategic role is also part and parcel with the conversation around what is the value of a brand.
Well, I think you're right. I think there is a lot of big committees there, but my experience and from what I know, there is an individual at Apple who carries not a CMO title, but it's Jaws. And I think you mentioned that him earlier, Kevin. Greg Joswiak, I think, kind of effectively has that role.
Yeah.
I think, to that point, Mac, to what you're saying is he's a pretty forceful guy, but he's not, nobody is Steve Jobs, right? First of all, he doesn't have the power that Steve had. But I think, one of the things I'm wondering that if they're going to do, or if he's going to focus on, is I think they've got a problem of product spread across categories, right? At what point, and I think one of the strategic forks that's coming up is, at what point do you say the traditional MacBook notebook form factor is gone? You're buying this next iPad that is the big Pro one they have with a keyboard, external keyboard, etc.
Yeah, I was actually thinking beyond Apple.
Okay.
In fact, I wasn't even thinking about Apple at all. Barely an Apple user. But that idea for Apple is that they have to come up with the what's next. And I think that they have depleted their what nextness genetics.
Yeah, I think,
and that's part of the issue.
Absolutely. I mean,
I think that was something we looked at when he passed was, I think I was talking to somebody, it might have been Tim or others at a conference. It's like there's probably 10 years of good stuff in the pipeline that was developed by Tony Fadell and Jobs and the hardware and software teams. And, we're a couple of years past that 10-year mark.
I would say that, and this is another, rant area, for me, is as much as the, strap it on and be someplace else, right? Set of technologies. I'm really, excited about, large scale augmented reality and living in smart environments, right? That the notion that, oh, you're still carrying a device, okay? You're living in an information impoverished environment because you still have to carry something with you, is on the way, right? Apple, has, good instincts on user interface, right? That they could apply in that space if they wanted to, right? The people that just got released from the Apple vehicle program, I think that they got, reassigned into AI, but, a lot of that was about, being in an environment, okay, in a smart environment. And they should reapply those instincts and the ethnographic work that they did into that, because we should be working in smart environments, living in smart environments to the degree that we can do that. I'll just also say that CMO, Mac, you were talking about CMOs, the brilliance, and I'm kind of, I wasn't one of these people, but I was able to watch it, is we had a particular type of person that was a product manager in ThinkPad. It was an undergraduate degree in electrical engineering and an MBA, right? And those EE MBAs had to go find the requirements, deliver them to development, then get the product into the marketplace successfully. That was the cycle that they had to be. They were there at the beginning, right? Well, what are we going to make? And then re-inherit it, bring it to the market, all right, successfully. You couldn't move on until you had finished that cycle. And in my humble opinion, a lot of CMOs don't have a strong enough voice in terms of what are we going to actually make that meets market requirements. They're handed something that somebody else decided was something good, and they're kind of go find some customers for this. That's not actually, end-to-end marketing the way that it should be practiced, right, in organizations, right? You should have those folks should be the voice of the customer, and then have responsibility for, you told us what to make, now go sell it. Go make the world safe for it. And
now it's all about
the salespeople should be saying, wow, people love this, right? Because you listened carefully. Go ahead.
No, now it's all about the funnel though for marketers, right? Get people into the funnel, right? Get them, no matter how you do it, just get that, be a digital marketer. And, Mac, to your point of view, the person that's speaking the loudest at those meetings is usually sales. And the moment they get some pushback, they look at the boss and they say, this is going to impact revenue.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And suddenly now they have all of the say in that meeting or in that decision-making process. And now you have a sales rep that is looking to overcome an objection from their last sales call that is now setting marketing direction.
Exactly, Rick. Or privately, outside of that meeting, that sales executive is saying marketing is interfering with my ability to do my job. Let's
Perfect.
get rid of this person and have the function report to me.
Yeah, but that's exactly what caused pre-year 2000 ThinkPad to have almost 1,000 different SKUs because there wasn't a combination of parts that sales and customers didn't like, right? The largest screen with the smallest hard drive, right? And it's kind of like, hold it, this is insane, all right? And as a result of going and doing the research and listening, and my team spent over $1 million, all right, listening to customers around the world, we got that down to 250 that we could actually describe, okay? And that were rational combinations of features and functions. And we said, these are the people, it wasn't, let me describe the product. Let me describe the person who wants this set of capabilities, and it's embodied in this ThinkPad. Oh, that's different, all right? And all of our marketing communications people got, excited because we weren't describing, technology. We were describing people who use technology, right? And we described the people first. And all of a sudden they lit up and they said, we can tell stories about that, right? Bing.
Outside of tech, though, if you take a look recently, Wendy's, damaged their brand by changing changing and then changing back their pricing structure, that they were going to charge more for food during busy times, right? And then once the backlash happened, that's when I'm sure the senior level meetings happened, where they're like, who thought this was a good idea, and who's going to answer the question of, if you're in line at 11:59 and the person in front of you pays X for a burger, and then you end up paying.
We did a whole
much
episode
more
about this, Rick. You remember that, Mike, right? Is on-demand pricing. And yes, it was interesting how, because that was just just a technology demonstration, and all of a sudden they said, Wendy's is going to, be extractive, right? And they got burned, pretty bad. They actually weren't going to roll that out. They were just going to do a pilot, but it was kind of like, don't do that. You're right, Rick.
Yeah.
That's the brand, right? The brand took a hit.
Yeah, because that was technology that wasn't necessarily supporting their brand promise, right? It was,
Food still tasted the same,
cool,
right?
This could add 3 cents to margin, but will people actually show up in the first place, all right? And then if they don't show up, forget about your dynamic pricing model.
But is it the fact that that it was the dynamic pricing model, or the way they put it out? Because Disney does it, airlines do it, everybody does it, and it works, and it has to be, marketed properly. That's the problem.
It was, you're right, Mark. The problem was they put it, it wasn't like they said in advance, hey, we're doing dynamic pricing. They put it up on their new digital display boards with their menu items. And people could actually, if you happen to be there at the time, you'd see the prices spin, right?
Well,
and all of a sudden change. And, that was, I still think, to your point, Rick, the executive response was, tell those people it's just a digital signage experiment. It's not dynamic pricing. We were just checking hardware out.
Well,
sorry.
It's lunchtime. It's time for me to look at Trivago for fast food. Okay. Who's got the best price? Okay. For, my dollar today.
Why not? Right. We all there's apps for gasoline pricing in the Bay Area,
Mhm.
right? You know,
Yeah.
uh,
Two can play at
and
this game.
exactly. It's like, hey, maybe we don't need a drive-through. Just will do it all online. They can find it on their cheeseburger average price point.
Well,
I say
fast
that out
food
loud,
food
and
courts.
somehow I believe there will be an app at some point in the future that does that. But you know, I think it's interesting because it's back to kind of where we started, right? We're now talking about kind of the endpoints, right? As you were saying earlier, these are now the edges of the cracking that's happened in the foundation as things have fragmented, particularly media. You know, for example, what are those channels? Well, I've got to use every single one of those channels to get to those consumers. And I think that's always been the last few years, as I've observed, that's been the problem. Nobody's been able to figure out, even with all of their analytics, right, which of these channels is most effective for a given individual. Because I think they have those data points. Nobody there is willing to say, but you know what? That means we don't have to spend. We can cut 25% on our email and direct mail campaigns, guys. We can just stop that right now because we figured out web search and app search is where it's at. We can, you know, we can really target people. Nobody's willing to say, you know, hey, we don't need to do that old direct mail anymore. I know it's costless. We all think it doesn't cost anything, but it does. And it's not as effective. I think that's the channel. Like a lot of CMOs sit there and go, I have to use every single channel possible, with the exception of, you know, advertising, you know, buying ads on World Series and Super Bowls because we're not that big. And I think that's again, especially since they're awash in all this customer data they've been acquiring. I think there's just too many people not willing to say, you know what, we don't need that channel anymore, or that channel is no longer of use to us or as effective. I think they're worried about that means a loss of status within the C-suite.
That's another good role for AI is to evaluate those decisions and start making them.
Yeah, assuming that's, you know, Mark, I think that the assumption is that to do that, you need to probably index and train the thing on the last 10 years, right, of every, you know, director level and above product decision, service decision, meetings, you know, the minutes of that, the research that went into any change. I think it should be done. I'm hoping there are
Doable and
companies who are
sellable,
doing
I
that.
think. As with my BCG hat on, I'd say go do it. But
Oh yeah, I think that would be the a methodology for indexing your corpus of both internal product team discussions and your strategic level C-suite meetings so that we can say, well, how do we come to all these decisions? Now we could say, what were the common points? What's the methodology we have extracted that says when we were really nailing it with products, with service, et cetera, here's why you know, these are how the decisions were made. I think to your point, Mark, yeah. And that the thing is, that would be an ongoing opportunity,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to not just okay, we did the check and the last 20 years here's the formula. Now you test it every month or every week or
You're going
whatever.
to need to be able to ingest the things that make something on brand that includes emotional intelligence and empathy, right?
Yeah.
And to the degree that you know, we begin to see, you know, the telltale signs of those things can manifest, right? Then, you know, you start to have, you know, AI that can behave on brand. And to some degree, that's why we did the Content Evolution GPT profiles, is it doesn't respond generically. It responds like Mark Prensky. It responds like Mike McGuire, right? And it's, you know, the responses are more on brand because it's been trained by you, right? Well, we need to be able to do that at a organization, institutional level. All right. Mike, I'm glad to have been, you know, kind of a guest today under your leadership, sir. It was good stuff.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much for that rant. I think we can make that a regular Kevin's Corner rant feature every couple of months.
I'm sending my best to Scott Galloway because he's a good guy. I just disagreed in this particular case in this narrow instance, right? So all the best. And Mike, I'll be talking to you soon.
All right, take care, everybody.
Mike, can you and I have 2 seconds?
I don't know if Kevin, does it stay on if you
Who's
leave?
running-
I'm
who's
just
running it? I
stop
just-
recording.